He's been called the hipper-than-thou pastor by Time magazine, the heir to Billy Graham. But Rob Bell is probably best known for his cool style of tying everyday stories with the things of God in his video series, Pneuma. Pastor to thousands at his church Mars Hill in Michigan and an author of 4 books, we recently sat down with this author and speaker in Toronto to hear his heart on the role of the church, what people need to learn in the midst of suffering, and why he sees drops like stars. So Rob, tell me, how did you end up in ministry?
I stumbled into this.
Yeah.
I was actually in a band, and my friends and I in our band, we thought we were going to be like the next great rock and roll saviors, and that didn't really pan out. Surprise, surprise. And kind of through that whole experience, I was really broken because kind of my plans weren't unfolding as they were supposed to. I became open to, well, I guess there's something else for me to do. I was teaching water skiing at this camp and somehow volunteered to give a sermon at this sort of Sunday chapel service thing. And I don't, to this day, know how I ended up saying, oh, I'll do that, because I'd never done anything like that, sermon. But I got up there to give the sermon, and it was like home.
Huh.
It was a significant sort of defining moment that changed my life. Like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. Oh, okay. Great. I could be like terrible at this, and I would still do this because this would be a blast.
You felt comfortable.
Yeah, it was an odd sort of, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Because I was always kind of searching, like, what am I going to do with my life? And from there, I kind of haven't looked back.
So tell me about Mars Hill. And I love the story of kind of how that started.
I was an assistant pastor in a church, and my wife and I had a growing, sort of an ongoing discussion and a growing desire to start something. I think we increasingly felt like the church that we were part of reached a significant segment of people and did that very well, but we had all sorts of friends and even us ourselves who had just, it wasn't reflective of the world we lived in. And so what does a church look like that maybe speaks the language of the world kind of we live in? And yeah, so 10 years ago, we were 28, we started Mars Hill with some friends. We had a couple meetings in our living room, and then somebody said, well, I got this building, you could use it for $1 a year. We're like, okay. Somebody else said, I got this and I got that, and it was really, really fast and spontaneous and absolutely crazy.
But the church started to grow very quickly, and suddenly Rob was presiding over 2 services back to back. The busyness had taken a toll, so he turned to an unlikely place for solace. Now in Velvet Elvis, you talk about locking yourself in the utility closet at one Sunday between first service and second service.
Yeah, I don't know if I locked myself in. Maybe I did. A detail I've conveniently forgotten. Yeah, we started the church, and what happened is it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and so there were more and more ministries and staff and people, and then we added a service, and it was like a treadmill with like a knob that just kept getting turned. And my experience has been a lot of pastors, especially in kind of Western North American church culture, are actually exhausted and don't have any sense of boundaries, because there's a sort of, I guess you're just supposed to be like Jesus, and just everybody who calls you answer, and everybody who needs something you give it to them, everybody needs to be visited, you go visit them. But actually Jesus has very, very strong boundaries. He's like, who appointed me to judge between you two? And no, I have to leave. And he withdraws to a lonely place to pray. And so there's a very strong sense of engagement and retreat. And that wasn't something that I had picked up along the way. And so I kind of reached this point.
You were young, too. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I'm probably like 29 or something, 30. At that point, I think for my wife and I, there was we have to go about this a different way, because if we live in response to all of the needs, we will always be miserable and exhausted, because there'll never be an end to that. But if we begin at some other point, like what does a healthy, balanced life of shalom look like, in which we are giving to people from a place of health and strength and rest. That's just a different way to orient yourself. my work now, over the years, as I've done more writing and teaching and creating things, there's now like a whole team of pastors who kind of run the church in the kind of day-to-day sense of empowering everybody. And I teach, but it's much more, the way that I serve the church is primarily through teaching about half the time. So it's a much different relationship than it used to be.
And since taking a step back in his role as senior pastor at Mars Hill, Bell has penned 4 books, all challenging the reader to rediscover who Jesus is and the meaning of faith. He has also been the face of the short film series Pneuma, but it's his style of telling stories and preaching that he might be most known for.
Your style, I alluded to that, your style is very different. I mean, you use a lot of stories to get your point across. Have you thought about your style and the way that you speak, using a lot of analogies and stories in order to get the point home?
Not in any sort of conscious, I want to be like this.
Yeah.
For me, there's it's a discovery, it's an exploration, it's a pursuit, it's the sort of wide-eyed, filled with wonder, what's around this corner. I find the world terribly electric, and I find people endlessly interesting. So I probably see what I do less in terms of there's this quantity of information, and I just need to pour it out, and people can just soak it up, as like there's kind of just get X amount of information into people. And I'm probably more interested in, I've seen this over here, check it out. Or I've experienced this, or notice this and this and this. And your initial impulse is these 3 things have nothing to do with each other, but maybe a friend of mine said, you know what you do? You tie the clouds together.
You do.
So I see it much more as a sort of exploration and discovery, and then I get the unbelievable opportunity to share these things with people.
In Velvet Elvis, his first book and one of his most popular and controversial pieces of work, he says it was his intention to present a study of who Jesus was and what his life was like. And that has always been his mission in trying to understand how the life of our church responds to the world we live in today.
What is your perspective of church today? When you look at, postmodernism, and you look at the emergent church, and you see how church is continuously transforming and, trying to bring a today message to the gospels that are so old. How do you perceive the way that we're doing church in order to reach out to an audience?
It seems as though historically the church is in the endless process of reclaiming things that got left behind.